The rumor first reached me on a crisp autumn evening during my sophomore year of college. Whispers in the dormitory hallways spoke of a mysterious figure at a local bar, one who could grant wishes and make deals beyond mortal comprehension. As a student of literature and mythology, my mind immediately conjured images of Faust's tragedy and Midas's folly. I knew the warnings well: be careful what you wish for. Yet curiosity gnawed at me, an insatiable itch that demanded scratching. For weeks I wrestled with the temptation. The world around me seemed to be descending into chaos. Wars raged across continents, political divisions deepened, and a sense of impending doom hung in the air like a thick fog. I yearned for answers, for some grand explanation that could make sense of it all. Finally, on a rain-soaked Friday night, I made my decision. The bar, ironically named Elysium, stood on the outskirts of town, a haven for bikers and outcasts. Its neon sign flickered weakly against the darkness, as if struggling to maintain its own existence. I hesitated at the entrance, rainwater dripping from my coat, before pushing open the heavy wooden door. The interior assaulted my senses, a cacophony of classic rock, the acrid smell of stale cigarettes, and the unmistakable tang of spilled beer. Grizzled bikers hunched over their drinks, their leathers creaking as they moved. Young men with wild eyes and matching jackets huddled in corners, their laughter tinged with a hint of danger. Tattooed waitresses weaved through the crowd, trays balanced precariously as they dodged wandering hands. And then I saw him. In the furthest corner, shrouded in shadow despite the proximity of a guttering candle, sat a figure that seemed to absorb the very light around him. He appeared young, perhaps in his mid-20s, with spiky black hair that seemed to defy gravity. His face was pale, almost translucent, as if it had never known the touch of sunlight. He wore a pristine white leather duster over a vintage Metallica t-shirt, the image of Lady Justice stark against the fabric. Blue jeans encased his legs, and from his belt loop hung a chain of black metal that seemed to radiate cold. I approached slowly, my heart thundering in my chest. As I neared his table, I noticed two things: a bottle of amber liquid that I doubted was on any normal menu, and a pair of empty tumblers that seemed to be waiting expectantly. "Excuse me, sir," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't move, didn't even open his eyes. Just as I was about to turn and flee, convinced I'd made a terrible mistake, he spoke. "Well, aren't you going to sit down?" His voice was soft, almost gentle, but it carried an undercurrent of something ancient and powerful. I swallowed hard. It's rude to sit at another man's booth without asking if your presence is even wanted. I managed to croak out, "Would you like some company, sir?" The silence that followed was oppressive, seeming to stretch for an eternity. Then, slowly, his eyes opened. They were a blue so pale and cold that they reminded me of glaciers I'd seen in documentaries. Those eyes looked me up and down, and I felt as if my very soul was being weighed and measured. Then he laughed. It wasn't an evil sound, nor was it menacing. Instead, it reminded me of a piano note struck after years of disuse, haunting, tinged with genuine surprise, and oddly beautiful. "Now that," he said, his thin lips curving into a smile, "is funny." He gestured to the seat across from him, and I sank into it gratefully, my legs suddenly feeling like jelly. "What's funny, if I may ask?" I stammered. "You, kid," he replied, his tone dry but not unkind. "You're funny, barely into your 20s, and yet you have respect. Manners. Do you know how rare that is these days?" He shook his head, still smiling. "People twice your age come barging in here, demanding deals or calling me a fraud. They cry about injustice or try to sell me sob stories. But you're a throwback, kid. I like that." He poured 2 shots of the amber liquid, sliding one across to me. I hesitated, but the thought of refusing seemed ruder than drinking. I knocked it back quickly, expecting it to burn. Instead, it filled me with a warmth that chased away the chill of the rainy night. As I set the glass down, I noticed an etching on the bottom, a grinning skull that seemed to wink at me. "Thank you, sir," I said, falling back on the manners my Marine father had drilled into me. "None of that sir business," he chided gently. "We're just 2 men in a bar. You can call me," he paused, considering, "Mortimer." I opened my mouth to introduce myself, but he held up a hand, silencing me. "I know who you are, Tony. Short for Anthony, though you can't stand your first name, Thomas, named after your father and his father before him, all the way back to your 4 times great-grandfather Atticus. You wish they'd given you his name instead, don't you? I sat there, frozen in horror and fascination. How could he possibly know such intimate details about me? As if reading my thoughts, Mortimer smiled again. You know who people claim I am, don't you? He asked softly. I could only nod. If I am indeed the Reaper, Hades, Thanatos, Death himself, how could I not know? He reached down and pulled on the black chain at his hip. It was attached to a massive, ancient-looking book, which he placed on the table with surprising gentleness. Opening it, he flipped through pages filled with spidery handwriting until he found what he was looking for. Ah, there you are, see? I leaned forward, my curiosity overcoming my fear. There, at the top of the page, was my full name, my date of birth, and beside it, a blank space. Before I could read any further, Mortimer snapped the book shut. Now, he admonished, though not unkindly. We can't have you reading ahead in your own story, can we? Might make you try to prove me wrong. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes this time. I'm sure you know how well that worked out for those Greeks who tried. As I watched, the book shrank until it was no larger than a cell phone, and Mortimer slipped it back into his pocket. Now that my credentials are verified, he said, shall we get to the reason for your visit? I felt as if I'd been punched in the gut. This was real. This was happening. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee from this impossible being. But I remembered something an old history teacher had once told me. History favors the bold. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself. Mortimer, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, I have come to bargain with you. He chuckled softly, knocking back another shot of the mysterious liquor. And what is it that you desire, Tony? Wealth, love, influence. With each word, his voice grew colder, as if the very idea of granting such wishes disgusted him. Before I could answer, he held up his hand again. No, I know what you want. You want knowledge. I nodded, unable to speak. He was right. All my life, I'd wanted to understand, to know why the world was such a mess, why people seemed intent on destroying themselves and each other. Mortimer's expression grew serious, almost sad. You want something far more dangerous than anyone else who's dared ask me for a bargain. I'd gladly give you wealth, even give you 20 years to enjoy it. For your manners, I'd give you love and only take 10 years off your life expectancy. But this, you're not asking for a boon, my boy. You're asking for a curse. He leaned back, studying me intently. I can't, in good conscience, give this to you for a price. Mortimer, I pleaded, I've come to bargain, and my request is within your power. As death, there's no one more equipped to know why humans act the way they do. Name your price, and I'll gladly pay it. I can't keep living in this world without knowing why. Please, just make a deal with me. Those glacial eyes bore into me, and I saw pity there. If he truly knew everything about me as his book suggested, then he knew I couldn't let this go. He also knew what I planned if he denied my request. I thought of all I'd seen in my short life, wars, genocides, the senseless slaughter of innocents. I remembered a time before the constant fear, before faith became a weapon instead of a comfort. I needed answers. I needed to understand. Mortimer sighed deeply, then nodded. I know your plan, Tony. I know your reasoning, and I can't deny your feelings, but I can't charge you for this. Instead, I'll grant you a single, rule-free, danger-free request. Once you have the information you seek, you may ask me for anything. My heart raced. I agree to this bargain, I said. Please, show me the answers I seek. I grant you your knowledge, Mortimer intoned solemnly. He reached out, placing a single finger on my forehead. At first, nothing happened. Then the spot beneath his finger grew uncomfortably warm, and suddenly my mind was flooded with images and information. I saw the minds behind every atrocity, every act of kindness. I understood the true motives behind each war, each act of terror, each moment of compassion. It was too much. The sheer weight of human stupidity and selfishness threatened to crush me. What horrified me most was the realization that there was no great evil behind it all. No sickness driving us mad, no shadowy conspiracy pushing us towards doom. The cause of all this suffering and madness was nothing more than our own overwhelming selfishness and our inability to see beyond our own petty desires. When Mortimer finally withdrew his finger, I found myself weeping uncontrollably, my mouth open in a silent scream of anguish and disbelief. As I looked at him through my tears, I saw my own pain reflected in his ancient eyes. Silently, he poured me another drink, larger than before. I downed it, grateful for the warmth that spread through me, chasing away the chill of despair. "Mortimer," I said, my voice shaking but filled with conviction, "I know my next request, and it's an easy task for you." "Name it," he replied, his voice as quiet as a cemetery at midnight. "Take me with you. Right now. I don't want to be a part of this anymore. I don't care what's waiting for me on the other side. Let me work for you, or just end it. Just get me away from this world." Mortimer smiled at me, a sad, understanding smile, and reached under the table. He produced a black motorcycle helmet and held it out to me. I took it, feeling its weight in my hands as he stood. We walked out of the bar together, into the cold night air. As we approached a gleaming white Harley-Davidson, I couldn't help but laugh. "What's so funny?" Mortimer asked, raising an eyebrow. "I'm sorry," I said, wiping away tears of mirth that mingled with those of sorrow. "It's just, I guess the Bible got something right after all." "And what would that be?" "That death rides a pale horse," I replied simply. We both burst into laughter then, and for a moment, the weight of knowledge lifted from my shoulders. I put on the helmet and climbed onto the bike behind Mortimer as he kicked it to life. As we prepared to leave this world behind, a quote from one of my favorite childhood books came to mind. I spoke it aloud, my voice barely audible over the rumble of the engine. He greeted death as an old friend and went with him gladly, and as equals, they departed this life. With a contented sigh, I left the mortal coil and all its burdens behind, riding off into eternity with death himself.